It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary as oatmeal, quiet as the clock that kept perfect time on my kitchen wall. I was pouring my tea when I heard my name from the porch. My son was talking to the neighbor, just a few steps away. His voice was low, but the words slid through the screen door like wind. "Mom's been getting forgetful lately," he said. "We're keeping an eye on things." I froze. The spoon clinked against the cup. Forgetful. I looked around that tidy kitchen. The bills stacked by due date, the kettle that always whistled on the third minute, the loaf of bread I'd baked last night because I remembered he liked the smell. Forgetful. The word wasn't just wrong, it was theft of competence, of respect, a little lie dressed like concern. That moment didn't break me, it sharpened me. He told them I was forgetful, so I started remembering everything. The sugar spoon slipped from my hand, and something in me woke up. This isn't a story about forgetting, it's about remembering who you are. Now, listen, this isn't a story about confusion or decline. It's a story about what happens when someone you love mistakes your silence for weakness. Today, I want to tell you how a rumor, one soft sentence about being forgetful, taught me to hold on tighter to truth, to memory, to myself. Because sometimes, what people call forgetting is really just being talked over too many times. So if you're sitting at home with your tea cooling, wondering whether you still matter, you do, and you can prove it, one remembered detail at a time. If you believe stories like these help remind the world that elders are still sharp and sacred, please like and subscribe. It tells the algorithm and the world that we remember each other. Stay with me, I'll show you how. I remembered my way back to respect. The kettle whistled like always. I moved slow but steady, the way you do when there's no rush left in your day. My mornings were the same as they had been for years. Fill the kettle, water the fern, open the curtains just wide enough to let the light fall on the crossword puzzle. The house creaked like an old friend remembering my weight. I liked the predictability of it. The clack of the mail slot, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the neighbor's car starting down the street at 8:05 sharp. It made me feel part of a world that still had order. That morning, I noticed something new. My son had been here the night before. He'd stayed for dinner, washed the dishes, and told me he'd tidied a few things up. I should have known that meant change. When I reached for my pill, I saw little white stickers on each section. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Not my handwriting, not my order. I'd been using that same organizer for years. Morning vitamins, evening calcium, without ever missing a day. The new labels looked like someone had decided I needed training wheels. I chuckled at first, trying to be kind about it. He means well, I told the empty room, but there was something hollow in my laugh. Later, I found my thermostat turned down to 6. He'd written a note, "So you don't forget to save on heat." The message was polite. The meaning wasn't, when you live long enough, you learn to read between words and the spaces between those spaces. The difference between help and handling, between love and management. I made my tea and tried to push away the sting. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But then, the phone rang. The bank. A polite young voice said, "Mrs. Hart, just confirming your son's authorization on your account update." Authorization? I asked. There's been no such thing. The silence on the other end lasted too long. "Oh," the voice said carefully. "My mistake, perhaps. It shows his name under the same address." I hung up slowly. I told myself it was just a clerical error, but my heart knew better. By afternoon, I couldn't focus on my crossword. My pen trembled just slightly, not from age, from the awareness that my life was being rewritten in pencil behind my back. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the porch light buzz against the quiet. I remembered my mother's saying, "Trust is a fragile dish. Once cracked, it never rings the same." The next morning, I reached for my car keys to drive to church. The little dish on the counter was empty. Only a folded note waited there, just for safety. "Mom, I'll bring them back later." Later, the word had become a leash. The kettle whistled again, and I felt something shift in me. One morning, my car keys were gone, and so was a small piece of my freedom. In our house, memory was proof, and proof was respect. When I was a girl, my father kept ledgers by hand, thick, black books lined with faint blue lines, every penny spent, every hour worked, all written down in the same careful script. He used to say, "Evie, memory makes a good story, but paper keeps you honest." My mother believed the same, but with feelings instead of numbers. She lit a candle every night before bed, so she'd remember to pray for those who'd passed. "Forgetting," she said, "is how good people turn careless." We weren't sentimental. We were steady. We believed in proof, in showing up, in keeping promises. When I married Robert Hart at 22, I brought that steadiness with me. He was kind and quiet, the sort of man who fixed what was broken before you noticed it had cracked. Together, we built a life the old-fashioned way: savings, small joys, Sunday suppers. I was the bookkeeper for his auto shop, balancing ledgers on Sunday nights while he scrubbed his hands raw from grease. After he passed sudden heart attack, I kept the books running for 3 months, just to help the new owner. Every decimal, every invoice, perfect. So when people now say Mom's a little forgetful, I think of those books, years of clean numbers that never lied. I think of the calendar I've kept since 1978, marked with every appointment, every phone call, every birthday card sent on time. No, I wasn't forgetful. I was recorded, remembered. My whole life had been proof of precision. I remember my son, as a boy. I used to make him balance his allowance in a notebook, every dollar, every expense. He hated it. Why does everything have to be written down? He'd grown, I'd say, because memory fades faster than ink. He didn't like that lesson. I see now, he may have been learning a different one. That people who remember everything are hard to control. It's a strange inheritance, the way our lessons twist as they pass down. My parents taught me that memory is power. Maybe he learned that memory is a threat. So I wrote things down, not because I doubted my mind, but because I trusted the truth. Still, I could feel the world rearranging around me. Friendly smiles, turning cautious. Are you sure you took your pills? Maybe you should rest. Don't worry, we'll handle it. I wanted to shout, I'm not a task to be handled. Instead, I folded my fury into quiet. Quiet has power too. I started to wonder who benefits when an old woman's memory gets questioned. Help can feel like love until you realize it comes with supervision. When my husband died, my son told me I'd never have to lift another worry again. It sounded like a promise, not a warning. He moved closer, said it was so he could check in. I was touched at first. Who wouldn't be? A son watching over his mother. What could be kinder? He took over paying the bills online. You don't need to bother with all that, he said. Everything's automated now. He added my groceries to his delivery account. He even adjusted my schedule, moving appointments, so he could help drive. At first, it felt sweet, convenient. But slowly, I noticed the pattern. My handwriting disappearing from checkbooks, my phone calls rerouted through his number, my voice showing up less and less in the daily decisions of my own life. Control, wrapped in kindness, supervision, disguised as safety. One afternoon, I picked up the phone to call my doctor and was surprised to hear my son's voice answer. He'd set up call forwarding, just in case. I felt a flash of something I hadn't felt since I was young, that stubborn, quiet outrage that says, "You've gone too far." The next day I checked my calendar, the one I'd kept since Robert was alive, the same small squares filled with birthdays, dinners, and to-do lists. I noticed a smudge of eraser marks near my own name. My birthday, written in blue pen, had been crossed out lightly, replaced with the word reminder. Check in with Mom, a note, not a celebration. That was the moment I realized love and doubt had been sharing the same kitchen table. That night, I sat by the window with the porch light on, the same way my mother once waited for me to come home from dances. The night air hummed softly against the glass. I thought about how help, once invited, can overstay its welcome until you don't recognize your own reflection in the mirror. Help can feel like love until you realize it comes with supervision. That night, I found my own birthday crossed off the calendar in pencil. It's a strange thing, hearing your own mind doubted out loud. It started the same way most betrayals do, gently. I was in the kitchen folding dish towels when I heard my son on the phone. He was talking to someone from work or church. His tone had that polite, slightly strained warmth people use when they're saying something they shouldn't. He said, "Yeah, Mom's fine. Just, she's been mixing things up lately." Mixing things up. That the words were casual, forgettable, even, but I heard them like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. That night, I went to the pharmacy, and the clerk said, "We double-checked your refill, dear, just to make sure we got it right this time." 2 days later, Mrs. Dalton from church stopped by with a tray of soup and said, "I can remind you about Sunday service if you need." It spread like perfume, that polite pity that fills a room before you notice the scent. The thing about a rumor is, it doesn't have to be cruel to be powerful. It just has to sound like concern. I tried to correct them, of course. "No, dear," I'd say with a smile. "I'm quite all right." And they'd nod with those soft eyes that say, "Of course you think you are." One morning, I opened the fridge and realized the milk had been rearranged. Labels all turned forward. He'd been here again, leaving invisible fingerprints, as though organizing my kitchen could tidy my mind. I sat down, pen in hand, and wrote the date on an old grocery list. He said, "I'm mixing things up." The ink looked too calm for the fury I felt. I knew then I needed a record, not for revenge, but for proof. It's a strange thing, hearing your own mind doubted out loud. That's when I decided, if they questioned my memory, I'd start recording everything. Every page I filled felt like planting a flag in my own name. I found an old spiral notebook in the hall closet, one of the cheap ones from back-to-school season, half full of recipes. I tore out the old pages, smoothed the rest, and started fresh. Every morning after my tea, I wrote down the date, the weather, who called, what time, what was said. I wrote down the groceries I bought, the shows I watched, what I cooked for dinner. I noted when my son visited, what he moved, what he said, and how long he stayed. Every page I filled felt like planting a flag in my own name. It wasn't paranoia, it was proof. After a week, my son noticed the notebook on the counter. He laughed. "Mom," he said, "you don't need to write everything down. That's for people who forget." I smiled. "Then I suppose I'll never forget." He shrugged, kissed my cheek, and went back to checking my smoke alarms, something I never asked him to do. I kept writing. I wrote quietly while he fixed things that weren't broken, while he suggested I give him copies of my house keys just in case, while he told the doctor's receptionist he'd handle my appointment reminders from now on. Each entry was a tiny rebellion. I began to feel stronger, steadier. The page became my mirror, reflecting back the truth no one else seemed to see. And then, one morning, the notebook was gone. Not misplaced, gone. The drawer where I kept it was neatly closed. The dust shifted just enough to show a hand had passed over it. I checked everywhere, the bookshelf, the kitchen counter, even the recycling bin. Nothing. When he stopped by that evening, I asked, "Did you see a notebook on the counter?" He looked straight at me, smiled too smooth. "You mean the one with the notes?" I moved it. "You don't need to keep track of so much, Mom. It'll just worry you." He patted my shoulder. Then one day, my notebook disappeared from the kitchen drawer. 8 Rising complication number 2, approximately equals 630 words. Hook. Emotional trigger. They called it paranoia. I called it remembering carefully. I didn't argue that night. I just nodded, the way women of my generation were taught to nod, to keep the peace. But peace built on silence always cracks. I began again the next morning. Another notebook. Smaller, this time, one I could slip into the pocket of my robe. I started making copies, leaving one in my purse, another inside a cookbook, another mailed to myself for a dated postmark. It wasn't madness, it was method. Every entry was dated, every detail recorded. Thursday, 9:32 a.m. Found thermostat changed. Friday, 7:48 a.m. Mail arrived with someone else's handwriting on the return envelope. I wrote everything, even how many times the kettle whistled before I turned it off. They called it paranoia. I called it remembering carefully. When my son noticed the second notebook, he sighed, heavy and dramatic. "Mom, you're getting obsessive. This isn't healthy." But I saw something flicker across his face. Not pity this time, fear. That same week, I received a bill from the electric company. It wasn't in my name anymore. It was in his. I stared at the envelope as the light outside dimmed to dusk. The house felt suddenly foreign, as though the air itself belonged to someone else. When my electric bill came under his name, I knew this wasn't about memory anymore. It's a strange kind of prison when the bars are made of good intentions. By then, small control had become system. The mail came less often, redirected to his address for safety. My online accounts locked me out. Passwords changed, to make things simpler. I started receiving phone calls where no one spoke, just breathed softly and hung up. And when I called back, my son would say, "Oh, that must have been me checking in." Pocket dial, probably. Even my church friends changed their tone. I caught them whispering before choir practice. One afternoon, dear old Marlene took my hand and said, "Honey, they say you've been getting a little mixed up lately. Don't worry, we've got you." I smiled politely, the way one does when the rumor has already outrun the truth. It's a strange kind of prison when the bars are made of good intentions, and still, I remembered. I remembered every word, every glance, every change in the house. One night, I heard footsteps in my study. I walked quietly down the hall. There he was, my son, sitting at my desk, rifling through my papers with the softest guilt written across his face. When he looked up, he tried to smile. I was just checking your files. Mom, you've got a lot of duplicates here. It's confusing. He said it kindly, the way you might talk to a lost child, but his eyes were afraid, not of me, but of what I might know. I caught him in my study one night, and the look on his face wasn't care, it was fear. They said it was protection, but it felt like erasure. The final straw came in a white envelope with a blue stamp. A letter from the bank. Dear Mrs. Hart, it began, confirming the addition of secondary account holder, Mr. Thomas Hart. My own name appeared smaller than his, like a footnote. I drove to the bank myself. The teller, young, polite, said, "Oh, your son explained everything. It's just for your safety." That word again, safety. Safety was starting to sound a lot like silence. When I confronted him that evening, his tone was calm, practiced. "Mom, it's normal. You're getting older. If something happens," I cut him off. "If something happens, I'll handle it." He looked at me with that smile people use when they think you're proving their point. "It's just protection. Mom. Double quotes protection. I stood there, hands steady, voice low. "You don't protect people by making them invisible," he said. "You're overreacting. It's already done. Already done." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my remaining notebooks spread open like soldiers. The lamplight flickered on my handwriting, precise, deliberate, alive. I realized then this wasn't just about bills or control. It was about existence, about being believed in your own house. They said it was protection, but it felt like erasure. I made one promise to myself that night. I would not disappear quietly. He wasn't trying to steal from me. He was trying to cover a hole with my good name. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Lane, who told me the truth. She came by with a pie blueberry, still warm, and the kind of look that says she's come to deliver more than dessert. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and sighed. "Evie," she said softly, "your boy's in trouble, isn't he?" My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said, "He's been asking around for short-term loans. He said something about a refinance, about needing access to the house paperwork. He said, you were fine with it." The kettle whistled behind us. I didn't move to stop it. The sound filled the silence between her words. I knew right then, this wasn't about forgetfulness. It was about survival. I pulled out my notes, the ones I'd been keeping all these months, and flipped to the page where the first change had appeared. The thermostat, the phone calls, the mail. The pattern was clear as a ledger line. Access first, explanation later. He wasn't trying to steal from me. He was trying to cover a hole with my good name. The thought hit like a bruise that wouldn't fade. My anger twisted into something sadder, heavier, because I knew the man I'd raised wasn't cruel, just scared. Still, fear doesn't excuse dishonor. I made tea for Mrs. Lane, though my hands trembled as I poured. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for telling me." After she left, I sat for a long time, watching the steam curl into nothing. I remembered his father, my Robert, saying once, "Desperation makes honest men foolish." Maybe this was foolish love. Maybe it was greed dressed like concern. Either way, my name was the currency. That night, I took my husband's old ledger from the drawer, the one with our first mortgage, written in blue ink, every number straight and true. I laid it beside my son's new papers and saw the contrast. Mine was built on trust. His, on justification. Knowing the reason didn't make forgiving him any easier. I was proving I wasn't forgetful, at the risk of being forgotten as a mother. The next morning, I put on my good coat and went downtown. I met with a lawyer whose office smelled faintly of lemon polish and printed paper. "I'm not here to accuse anyone," I said. "I'm here to document truth." He nodded. He'd seen my kind before, the polite generation, the ones who show up with envelopes instead of emails. We began the process. Cognitive test, notarized statement, witness signatures, clear, stamped records that said plainly, "Evelyn Hart is of sound mind." It felt humiliating, needing strangers to confirm what I already knew. But sometimes, proof has to speak louder than pain. When my son found out, he was furious. "Mom, you went to a lawyer. You don't trust me." I looked him in the eye. "Trust isn't blind, sweetheart. It's verified." He slammed his car door and drove off. Neighbors whispered, "She's being dramatic. Families go through things. Old folks get scared." I wasn't scared. I was awake. That night, I sat by the lamp, flipping through the new documents, each page notarized with a gold seal that shimmered like armor. I was proving I wasn't forgetful at the risk of being forgotten. As a mother said I was breaking the family apart, but I was only holding my ground. Even the envelopes stopped seeing me as a person. The world has a way of closing in when you stand your ground. Church friends started stopping by, awkward and earnest. Evelyn, maybe just talk to him, they said. Family comes first. His wife called me, her voice shaking. He's ashamed, you know, he thought he was helping. You don't need to make it public. Public, they all wanted quiet resolution, as if silence were mercy. Meanwhile, letters arrived in the mail, addressed to the Hart Family Trust. I never approved that name. My name, printed smaller beneath it, like an afterthought. Even the envelopes stopped seeing me as a person. I filed them away with the rest. Every document, every note, every timeline. I knew the talk would grow louder before it quieted, but truth, like bread, needs heat to rise. Tomorrow, we'd sit at my kitchen table and I'd bring every receipt. They wanted me to doubt my memory, but remembering was how I survived. That night, the house felt too large. The clock ticked louder than usual, each sound reminding me I was the only witness to what had been done. I spread the papers across the table, ledgers, bank statements, notes, a lifetime of remembering in ink. My eyes blurred, not from confusion, but exhaustion. For a moment, I almost gave in. I thought about calling him, saying, "Forget it, take it all, I'm tired." But then I heard Robert's voice in memory, deep, steady. Never let silence make you small. They wanted me to doubt my memory, but remembering was how I survived. I traced the handwriting on our old mortgage again, the same loops, the same penmanship I'd carried my whole life, proof that my steadiness wasn't a performance, it was inheritance. By dawn, I'd written one more thing, a letter, short, handwritten, firm. I remember, and I can prove it. I tucked it into my coat pocket, folded my papers, and waited for morning. I tucked that letter in my pocket, and waited for morning. I'd spent months collecting proof, not to shame them, but to remind them who raised them. When the morning came, I brewed tea for 3, my son, his wife, and the lawyer I'd invited. They arrived, uneasy, carrying politeness like a shield. The lawyer laid out the papers, notarized documents, medical assessments, account statements, my handwriting clear as ever. I turned to my son. "If I'm so forgetful, these pages must have remembered for me." He didn't answer. "I didn't do this to shame you," I said softly. "I did it to remind you who raised you, a woman who pays her bills, who remembers her dates, who keeps her promises." His wife began to cry. He just sat there, staring at the papers that refused to lie for him. Finally, I said, "Here are the new terms, transparency or distance. If you want to help, it will be written. If not, I will handle my own life." The room went still. The only sound was the kettle cooling on the stove. His silence was the longest sound I ever heard. I said quietly, "If you ever tell people I'm forgetful again, make sure they know what I remembered." The air in the kitchen was heavy, like a storm had been circling the block all morning, waiting for its cue. The documents were spread out between us, ledgers, notarized statements, receipts, dates, years of my handwriting lined up like soldiers, waiting to defend the truth. My son's eyes darted from one page to another. His wife sat beside him, her hands clasped tight around a mug of untouched tea. Finally, he said it. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom." "I know," I said, my voice even, "but meaning doesn't erase what's done." He looked younger then, the boy who used to climb the kitchen counter to steal cookies, not the man who'd quietly rewritten my name into his paperwork. He ran a hand through his hair. Things got hard. The bills, the debt, the house. I thought if I could handle it all, you wouldn't worry. I looked at him for a long time. "You didn't want me to worry, so you made me invisible." He swallowed hard, staring at the floor. "I didn't know how else to fix it," I said quietly. "Love doesn't mean surrender." He looked up, eyes glistening. "You think I wanted this?" "No," I said. "I think you wanted control, because control feels safer than honesty." The words hung in the air, not cruel, just true. The lawyer cleared his throat and slid a paper forward. "Mrs. Hart has prepared a notarized affidavit confirming her capacity and a corrected set of powers of We'll need your acknowledgement." My son hesitated. "What happens if I don't sign?" I answered for him. "Then we both lose you, a mother, me, my name." He stared at me, and I could see the fight drain from his shoulders. The mask of confidence slipped away. leaving only shame and exhaustion. He took the pen, signed his name, and then stopped, his hand trembling slightly. "What's this line?" he asked. "That," the lawyer said. "Acknowledgement of Mrs. Hart's competence. It states that you recognize her mental clarity and independence." He looked at me. For a moment, he almost smiled. "Small, broken, but real. Guess that's fair," he said. He signed. My heart didn't swell with triumph. It just steadied, like a clock returning to the right time after running slow. I gathered the papers and said softly, "If you ever tell people I'm forgetful again, make sure they know what I remembered." The kettle on the stove began to whistle sharp, steady, unbothered. For a long moment, no one spoke. We started asking before assuming. It was like learning a new language called respect. The weeks that followed were quieter. He called every Sunday, not to check on me, but to ask if I wanted company that mattered. He began labeling his own files. He brought me my car keys and placed them on the dish without a word. One morning, he said, "I'll stop by tomorrow if that's okay." I smiled. That's how it's done. We started asking before assuming. It was like learning a new language called respect. Bills came directly to me again. I handled them with the same sharp pencil I'd used for years. The pharmacist greeted me by name, not by doubt. Even the neighbors stopped tilting their heads when they saw me. One afternoon, I caught my son standing in the doorway, watching me fill out a crossword. He smiled and said, "You still remember all the big words, huh?" I looked up. "Only the ones that count." We didn't talk much about what happened. Sometimes silence is its own kind of truce, but rebuilding trust is slower than proving memory. Still, the rhythm of the house returned, one steady note at a time. They called it forgetfulness. I call it proof. I've lived long enough to see the same trick twice. I tell this story not to shame anyone, but to remind you, forgetting isn't the same as being forgotten. If you ever find people rewriting your story, start keeping your own record. Write down names, dates, details, not because you're paranoid, but because memory is your inheritance. Ask for paper, make copies, sign with confidence. Don't be afraid to say, "I remember." They called it forgetfulness. I call it proof. I've lived long enough to see the same trick twice. There's strength in clarity. There's power in proof. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to write things down and hold your head steady when they call you confused. Aging isn't losing, it's witnessing, and witness is the truest kind of memory there is. We weren't perfect, but we were learning to remember together, they said. You reminded us that remembering is an act of love. After the story went out, I received letters, hundreds of them. A woman from Iowa wrote, "You made me start keeping a notebook again. My daughter calls it my proof journal." A man from Arizona said, "I called my mom and apologized for treating her like she was fragile. She's tougher than I'll ever be." Another wrote, "My dad used to say, write it down or it didn't happen. You reminded me why." They said, "You reminded us that remembering is an act of love." And one message made me cry, "Because of you, my mom got her name back." I still write everything down, not because I doubt myself, but because I trust what lasts. These days, my life is simpler. The ledger sits open on my kitchen table, its pages clean, its lines steady. My son stops by every Thursday with coffee. Sometimes he brings his wife, sometimes just his laughter. He asks before touching the thermostat. He calls before changing plans. We still make mistakes, but they're honest ones now. The porch light hums softly. The air smells like jasmine and ink. I still write everything down, not because I doubt myself, but because I trust what lasts. The kettle whistled again, and this time, no one corrected me. If this story touched you, tell me what you'd have remembered. If this story touched you, tell me what you'd have remembered, or what someone once forgot to see in you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs reminding of their strength. Next time, the photograph that changed everything. Thank you for remembering with me. See you soon.